All right, podcast episode 2. I'm here with my good friend Yoel, and today we're going to discuss animation and adventure. Good to have you with us today.
Nice to be here.
All right, so kind of a little bit, we've been good friends for a while. We went to high school together. Many adventures along the way. Many car rides. We've even traveled to a few different countries together ourselves. So kind of what I want to talk about first is your experience. So you're an animation major. That's what you're going to get your degree in. And you're very passionate about that field and very talented. So I kind of want to first talk about what does kind of animation mean to you? What does it entail? And why is it so important?
Well, I think animation in one sense, it really means freedom to me.
Okay.
Because, you can do so much with it. Because when you're creating, let's say, a live-action film, of course you have a lot of creative control and a lot of... Well, you get the actors, you get the costumes, and you get all of that, and someone makes it. But in animation, you make literally the set, you make the actors, you make everything. So the thing is, you can fine-tune the world to however you want, and oftentimes people stylize differently for sometimes different purposes, or sometimes trying to make a point, or sometimes just to look cool.
Yeah, it seems like you have a lot of, like you said, creative liberty and stuff, and where you're not just, writing certain sets or scripts or something like that. You're almost creating the character out of nothing, and then from there, a lot of people more have to go off of your work because you're like the main background behind it in a movie or in a video game or in any sense like that too.
Yeah, I would say because the video game and animation, there's a very fine line between those two because video games use animation.
Yeah.
But I'd say for one thing that's really important in animation, I guess it's a similar thing in film that there's an actor who's typecasted, who plays a certain type. In animation, they oftentimes design characters to be specific roles. Like one of the things, if you look at most of the Disney villains, the villain always has a very long face, and it's designed because I forget the exact reasoning, but the longer face looks more sinister. And Frozen spoilers, but if you notice Hans, who tries to murder Anna and tries to murder Elsa, tries to murder pretty much everyone, steal the power. If you notice, his design, and if you compare him to Kristoff, Hans has a much longer face, and the thing is they designed him more sneaky, that he looks more kind-hearted than normal, but he still has that long face, and the weird sense is the character design gives away his villain.
So also, I know you've been to Falmouth University in the UK, and now you're going to Australia to study more as well. How does that influence your animation skills, or why did you choose to go to those places rather than a university in the US, for example? Did it give you different opportunities? Did you just like the environment better, or kind of go pivot off that a little bit more?
Well, the reasoning is complicated and also simple at the same time. So one of the short answers is, in spite of the pound being much higher than the dollar, it's still somehow cheaper to go to uni in Europe because good animation school like MICA, that's over in Baltimore, Maryland Institute of the Arts, it's a really good school, good animation program, but it's about $45,000 for a year,
expensive.
And it's 4 years. While in the UK, it's about £15,000 for 3 years, so that's $18,000, $20,000.
Yeah.
So basically, getting my degree is cheaper than half of my degree in the States.
Wow.
But then the other thing is, I'm a Hungarian citizen as well, so I'm a European Union member. So I don't have to go through a visa process, so I can just come in and out of the UK, well, pre-Brexit, as much as I want. So I'd already been living in Hungary for a year and a half, and I really like being in Europe, and I actually kind of wanted to remain there. And if you get a European degree, I think it's a bit easier to stay in that vicinity because then you have work connections in Europe. That was one of my intentions.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Not you.
That's all right.
That was it.
So so that makes a lot of sense, obviously, just the fiscal nature of it. And like you said, it's easy for you to come in and out, and you just like the area and experiences.
Yeah, to explore the UK as well. That's a given.
Of course. Great.
Yeah, it's lovely. The English are lovely. Really lovely people.
Yeah. So maybe just for example, give us a little rundown of a day in your life, kind of what you're going through, specific things you might be studying, kind of hours worked or projects that you might have that could expect anybody that knows anything about animation or studying it kind of would go through.
Well, for one thing, you were going to spend loads of time in the studio. Like, there was many days that I would be in the studio from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. You know, you take lunch breaks and that sort of thing, and dinner breaks, but you're normally just animating, working on projects. The bulk of animation school is working on your project.
Yeah, it's just like on-the-ground experience, kind of, not just in a classroom.
Yeah, you have some tutes, you have some lectures, but the bulk of it, at least at Falmouth, the university's approach is they really want to treat it more like it's a job and that you're really getting experience, so they really give you a lot of work, and you have to use your time wisely, because normally you have to really balance out. It's a good example, because that's the one thing is, everyone knows like animation takes a really long time.
Yeah.
But no, you don't actually realize how long it takes until you actually do it.
Yeah, because if you're going frame by frame, I mean, I've even seen you doing some of your work, and I was like, that's pretty time consuming just for even maybe a simple minute or two video.
Because the most important thing in any animator is patience. Like, honestly, patience.
Okay, patience.
Because, like, if you don't have patience, that's the wrong field for you.
Exactly. All right, so you brought up a good point by saying that your teachers and kind of the field in general, or the major you're studying, said treat it like a job. So a lot of people would say, maybe not specifically for animation, but you know, that errs more on the side of like liberal arts, creativity, kind of major people who go to school for it. And a lot of days people kind of demonize that because you can't necessarily, unless you're really good or talented, make a consistent, you know, living off of that. If you're, you know, a musician or an artist or a writer of animation, like you said, it's a little bit easier because you can cross over in different fields. But what do you kind of think about people who say, you know, maybe schools should stop offering those kind of majors because they're just not cost effective?
Well, it depends, because I don't see animation as a liberal art. I see it more as a trade in a sense, because you have to do a lot of work. And it is an art, and it does take a lot of creativity and artistic skills, but I don't say it's a liberal art, because most of it is time-consuming manual labor that you're only drawing moving keyframes. And what really differentiates animation, there's loads of work for animation students, because you have television, film, advertising, games, so if you have a good show reel, you're set for a job. There's loads of work, especially because of the film industry.
And does that make it easier to access, or does that make it the bar set that much higher for students coming out, that they have to have like a specific amount of portfolio work or quality and stuff?
I'd say
and is it really competitive?
Yeah, it's very competitive. So yeah, I'd say definitely the bar is considered higher, because if you don't have a good show reel, they're not even good. Because they're looking at like tons of show reels a day. So if you don't impress them in the first 10 seconds, they're just going to shut it off, move on to the next person.
They just have so many other people waiting in line.
Yeah, so when you're making your show reel, you really have to convince them. You have to begin with, you know, people always say, save the best for last, but not in this case. Because if you save the best for last and start mediocre, they're not even going to see the last.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so pivoting from that a little bit too. So you've been all these different places traveling, learning animation and such. Also, I want to talk about, how do you think maybe travel could shape an individual in the sense of, I guess more, we can talk about the U.S. climate a little bit more, how people these days tend to see it's very polarized, very pulled apart, and that maybe just traveling more, because I found a cool, interesting statistic that said Americans are far less likely to travel than Europeans, for example. Less than 50% of U.S. citizens own a passport. Nearly 1/3 of U.S. citizens have never actually been outside of the country. Then, for example, people who live in the UK, France, or Germany, they've been to an average of 8 to 10 countries, probably mostly in Europe, because they're just so much closer. And there's all these different cultures within that they get to interact with. And how do you think, just since you said you have another passport too, how would you compare maybe the average American's idea of like other countries and experiences and travel to maybe somebody for you that, you know, obviously you lived a little bit in both worlds?
Yeah. Well, I'd say the biggest thing is geography, because the United States, for one thing, is massive, and the only neighboring countries are Canada and Mexico, and, you know, in a weird way, Alaska. I mean, not Alaska, sorry, I meant to say Russia. I was thinking of Alaska.
I mean, Sarah Palin, same difference.
Same difference, yeah. Pretty much another atmosphere. But anyhow, so that's one thing. So for a lot of Americans, like, other countries aren't necessarily as accessible, because for my family, we lived in Austin, Texas, Yes, we were, like, Texas is right near Mexico, and, like, whenever we visit my grandma who lives in El Paso, like, 15 years ago, you would actually, like, back when it was safe, we would go over to Juarez for, like, an afternoon to Mexico. But I'd say, but I remember, like, for years we wouldn't my mother wouldn't go home to Hungary. Beautiful family you will ever meet.
Alright, so we got cut out for a little bit too, so to pivot back, so we were talking about different countries and traveling, and the difference between like maybe an American traveling abroad, their experience with it, as opposed to a European, or somebody who's had a lot more experience with other countries. And then we were talking about specific state pride with Maryland and stuff too, and how you said going away, kind of being away from, you know, the American side of it or the Maryland side of it to be more specific kind of made you more patriotic, more state pride? How would you explain that?
Maryland's different. I think it's more really realizing obscure state, and like the thing is there's so many great things about Maryland, but once you go overseas, like I'd say like overseas people know like California, Texas,
Yeah, the big states.
New York, like Washington D.C. and like Washington State, but like don't really know like the other states. I think they hear of Virginia, but no, it's unfortunately from my experience, no one knows Maryland. And
exactly, you have to explain to them.
even less people know Annapolis, Maryland. They always think you're saying Indianapolis.
Yeah, exactly.
But it happened is because I have a really good dear friend of mine who lives in California. She's also a Hungarian American like myself.
Yeah.
We started having this like playful state rivalry because I'd always have to explain where Maryland was, and that to the point that I just gave up and said I'm from Washington D.C. because it's just easier. But I love it. There was an end of the year thing of the dorm we were in Hungary. I was sitting like next to my friend Melinda, and she basically this older Hungarian lady comes and sits down next to us. She says, "Oh, hello, where are you? Where are you from?" And my friend Melly says, "Oh, I'm from California." And she says, "Oh, that's nice." And I say, "I'm from Maryland." And she says, "What? What's that? Where's Maryland?" And what's Maryland? And I'm like, Washington, D.C. Oh. And immediately afterwards, my friend Melinda turns to me and she says, "California, they know us." Maryland? What's Maryland? And so like I have this like thing with like my friend now, and like I always
I'm from Maryland.
Maryland, like I was in like Salt, California, because you know California, it's a lovely place. It's a lovely people. I'm sure are lovely there. It's just now my friend and I have this like playful rivalry. It was fun, but then someone once when I was in the dorm, there was a party, and so I was like, "Oh, we found a guy from Maryland," and then we just started talking about random Maryland stuff like Ravens, Pikesville, Goldberg's Bagels. Happened to me in Australia too, because when you meet someone from your state, it has more meaning than meeting someone from the United States.
Exactly.
The United States, we have a shared culture, a shared history, but there's still a lot of little nuances to each state. So when you meet someone from your own state, you relate more, and especially when it's a state like Maryland that's smaller, because Texas, like when I lived there, I lived in Austin, and my grandma was 10 hours away by car.
Yeah.
So
it's just completely different life.
I mean, there's similarities, of course, in Texans will relate. But what I'm saying is Maryland, you have a better feel of the whole state.
Do you think that maybe because certain people in the United States don't travel as much necessarily as other countries too, that they kind of have more of a wariness of other cultures or places that they would visit, like, oh, I would never visit this country, I don't like that kind of people, or even I don't like that kind of food, and would that kind of, you know, does that make them more, I don't know, I don't necessarily want to say like xenophobic maybe or something like that, because, you know, the traditional thing is like Americans are loud and obnoxious when they go to other countries, and it always seems to be like a bad representation of people in general. Do you feel that's like a fair stereotype, or is it a little bit different than that?
Well, it really depends, because there's 320 million of us,
Yeah.
so it's always different. And oftentimes, the very like super Americans, they don't tend to travel as much when they really should. But I feel it comes from, I think it's just more basic. I don't think it's necessarily xenophobia. I think it's just more basic. Most people are just not comfortable leaving their comfort zone.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that like it depends how you're raised, because other reason I'm so comfortable, about traveling is having a foreign parent makes a huge difference because always growing up, like my mother made me very comfortable with like other cultures, and I'm not just talking Hungarian because on the weekends we go to the Korean marts and go to Korean areas, go to a Hispanic shop, go to like a Polish shop. We'd go to all these different places, and oftentimes when you're like an immigrant, like my mother was, that your friends are other immigrants, so oftentimes you have a bit more interaction with people from other countries, because oftentimes that's what I've noticed too, like when you get to another country and you're an immigrant, normally if you're from a different country as another immigrant, because you're immigrants, you relate to each other. Because in the UK, I certainly had English friends, I really did, I have a lot of lovely English friends, but like my best mate was a Lithuanian guy and an Italian guy, so like we're all immigrants, we're not English.
Yeah.
So like, because like we relate to it, because in a sense that even though like Lithuania, Italy, United States,
They're not very similar.
Not similar at all, even though that, but you kind of bond over like the differences and like examining the other culture, and you have fun with it. And, like, I do have loads of English friends too, but the people I'd hang out the most weren't necessarily English.
Yeah, so maybe it's just like the novelty of the specific experience in the sense, because you're all coming from a different place.
Yeah.
But even though there's no similarity in that, it's we're all coming from a different place, and we can still bond over that experience.
Yeah, exactly. That sort of thing. And kind of thing, and I would say, when I was living in Hungary, like one of my best friends was Canadian, because from my experience, Canadians and Americans are pretty much the same thing.
Pretty much, yeah.
They're pretty much the same.
Just in demeanor, or like how would you give an example?
I mean, like demeanor. I mean, the Canadian accent and the American accent, they just say "ute" and "big." I mean, my friend Abel, that's my Canadian friend. We were talking about how similar, like there. Of course, there's differences. I mean, stereotypically, Canadians are nicer, and I can't say I've ever met a rude Canadian.
Yeah,
So
true.
They're lovely people. But yeah,
cool. But so maybe to kind of end it up a little bit too, some of the favorite countries or places you've been to, and maybe one good experience or bad experience, maybe just something that's very memorable. That you could give. It could be, from anything, doesn't have to be the same place, but just kind of a cool little tidbit. And this is where we pause for a sponsorship for Big Coke. So, there you go.
Disclaimer, we're not sponsored by Coke, but we'd love to be.
There's a coupon code in the description below.
Yeah. Anyhow,
Well, people do that in videos. They'll just either they'll put in the plug-in ads just like as part of the video and then you have to skip through them, or they'll just be like, paid advertisement in the bottom. I'm just like, okay, I mean, if you want to do that. I mean, it doesn't seem to bother people for the most part.
Yeah. But I mean, free advertisement is free advertisement. I mean, there's nothing bad as, nothing, no such thing as bad publicity. I mean, a guy got into the White House because of that.
That's true. I mean, he just sold shitty steaks and vodka, and there you are.
The name. Anyhow. Trying to think.
Or maybe just in the past year or so with your more experience, if you want to tie that back into an animation, something like that too as well.
Well, I mean, that's one thing. Well, that's one thing, like, you realize, like, traveling overseas is that people are more similar than people think. Like, people, like, of course we all have different cultural nuances, that sort of thing. But overall, people are people is the thing. And that was my thing, is like...
That's a good thing.
It's a weird... We say it because I don't know any American animation students, so I can't speak for American animation students.
Yeah.
But when I was with English ones and Australian ones, they're very similar. They're similar types of people. It attracts the same kind of people. But I've never been to Afghanistan or Iraq, but always when people say like reconciling different cultures, always one thing that comes to my mind is I used to watch a lot of Bizarre Foods with Andrew Zimmern. There's an episode where he goes to, I can't remember if it's Iran or Afghanistan, but one of these ones that right now it's not the best time to go to United States intervention, but like Andrew Zimmern sits down with this old man, and this old man says some really wise words, which he says that people don't hate people, governments hate governments.
That's a good point that I never kind of, I guess, framed it, because the way you kind of learn about other countries or people is through a larger frame rather than necessarily personal experience, like you had a friend that went somewhere or something else. It's just kind of like the general notion that people give off through, you know, a government lens or a media lens or however you
Yeah.
want to look at it, and it seems pretty bland and not really personal.
Yeah, exactly. Just continually demonizing one another or putting one another on a pedestal, and really people are just people, and just go and experience and really go interact with other people, and you'll learn a lot from them.
I think that's a good note to end on. And people are people, right? You heard
Yeah.
it first here. People are people.